Hello?
May we have your attention, please? All right, we are going to begin our presentation. And our first speaker of the day is Jennifer Naylor, a member of the Southbury Board of Selectmen. Jennifer.
Why, thank you, Mr. Monteleone. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for coming and for participating in the Community Assessment Survey. We are here today to hear the results as presented by the Center for Research in Public Policy. But first, we'd like to give you a little bit of background. The survey showed that only about 50% of the people were somewhat involved and engaged in monitoring our process as a task force. So we thought we'd just give a brief overview of our team. So John is the chair and I'm the vice chair, and Jeff Manville, our first selectman, is ex officio. I had to stop for a minute. I wanted to say thank you very much to Roger Giordano, the president of Heritage Village, and to Kathy Oliveri, the vice president, Ron Conti, and to Bob Scarlett, and to Joe Conlon, and to Jen Finn, for everything they did to help us promote the survey throughout Heritage Village. So thank you very much to all of you. Okay, so back to the slide. As you can see, there are quite a number of our members. They're all volunteers, and we have representatives from the Board of Finance, the Economic Development Commission, and all the land use commissions are represented on our task force. Additionally, we have private members, people who have never been involved in town government before engaged. We put out a request for those people with strategic planning experience to send us a resume, and so we were able to put together a task force with the aid of certain town key employees, the chief financial officer and the land use planning administrator, and several other residents, to provide for you a strategic plan. That's our ultimate goal. Brooke, if you would please. Thank you. So our objectives enumerated right here, but I wanted to highlight that the survey that has just been completed, is only a step. It's only a data source for our inevitable goal of the draft strategic plan, which will be presented to the Board of Selectmen. We have a soft target date, July 1st. And I'd like to actually introduce, for those of you who don't know, Ron Puglisi is one of our members. Also, he's here this evening. Ron Conti is also one of our members. Susan Monteleone in the green sweater is also one of our members, so it's nice to have them here as well. Okay, so the objectives are here. This presentation will be put on the town website, so you can look at it in depth if you like. Next slide, please, Brooke. Thank you. So why are we doing this? Why are we putting together this plan for the town? Well, it's required under the town charter. The Charter Revision Commission many years back, maybe the second.
2009.
2009. Put it into the charter as a responsibility of the first selectman, and we are simply, with his oversight, providing it to the Board of Selectmen. The partnership with stakeholders comprised of residents, businesses, elected officials, and town staff, like I just set forth in that last slide. And we have all guaranteed this process as collaborative and accountable. We've worked together, we've disagreed, we've gotten input from residents through presentations that we've held, through a strategic planning dedicated email that we have, and workshops. Next slide, please. Thank you. The focus of the survey and of the strategic plan were three areas: changing the mix of the grand list with direct implications to the economic development of our town, hence our taxes, because currently we are at 83% residential and 17% commercial. Efficient local government and quality of life. And perhaps upon doing the survey, you realize that that was the focus of the survey. And the reason we're here today is so that Jerry Lindsley could present the results, but like I said, we want to give you a little background information. If you could please, next slide, please. So right now, this is the phases that we've been following. We are in the third phase. We have just completed the community survey assessment, and we, as a subcommittee of the task force, are working as we're called a drafting team, and we are working to come up with a municipal vision and the strategic pillars for the plan. So we have a little bit more work to completing the plan, but what we're going to do upon receipt of these results is we're going to do a strengths, weakness, opportunity, and threats analysis of the information that is garnered and presented by Jerry tonight. And then we will take that information together with other data sources that we've collected and come up with a draft plan for recommendation to Jeffrey Manville and the Board of Selectmen. Next slide, Brooke. Thank you. So we went out to bid for the services of our community assessment survey because we wanted objectivity. And these are the 5 vendors who gave us their bids, and we went with CERC. We went with CRPP, not only because they were the lowest bidder, but because they offered the most disciplines to complete the survey. As you know, it was done online. You could call up and do it over the phone if necessary, or you could call on the phone and you could complete, they would send you a hard copy of the survey and you would send it back and it would be counted. And lastly, the last slide I have, again, these are the 3 focuses that these are the 3 areas we focused on with the survey and we'll be focusing on with the draft plan. And as you can see from the diagram, they do interrelate. And on that note, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Manville just to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. First, I'd like to thank the committee and John Monteleone and Jennifer Naylor for their work in CRRP. It's obviously CRPP. CRPP. I'm looking at this and frankly, yes, in the beginning I always said the quality of life in Southbury, and I think you'll see the slides, is something that has to be maintained. And again, efficient local government is something we're working towards, and the change of the grand list is also important, and especially in this economy. So I'm very excited about, I glanced over, I haven't had a lot of chance to digest the survey in depth and looking at it. I'm hoping to learn some more input from here and then from the group that's working on this. And I think once we're able to get that all digested and then come to an understanding of what the material means, we're going to know a direction and move forward from there. So thank you. John Monteleone, our other chair. Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir. Okay, as Jennifer mentioned, the slide disappeared. Okay. I'd like to preface my remarks by telling everyone here that today is my wife Susan's birthday. And the reason I didn't buy her a present was because I've been working on this program. So.
Right, it doesn't buy you an excuse, no.
All right, back to work. As Jennifer said, the strategic plan was included in the Southbury Town Charter in 2009, and hats off to Jeff Manville, because when Jeff took office, he said, we are going to pursue the strategic plan, and we did. So he wrote a letter on March 2nd to the town. It's on the website if you haven't seen it yet, described a few minutes ago. Next. So very simple. People think this is a monumental thing, and how do we do this? We try to determine where are we now, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. If we figure that out, we're in good shape. In addition to the work that we've been doing, we also went to other people, other resources in the community. We talked to, and I'm not going to read all that to you, but there's a lot of resources out there that can help us with our strategic plan. So we identified them all. We haven't talked to everybody yet, but we've talked to most of them. And as a result of that, we've gotten tremendous and valuable input from people who have been through this process before. So we're not the first people on planet Earth to come up with a strategic plan. Next. This is just to prove to you that we've had many meetings. I started out as a young man when we began this process, and you can look at me now and you can see what's happened to me. But in any case, we're in our 20th meeting. That doesn't include the meetings that the work groups have had, because they've met separately. It doesn't include the meetings that Paul Butler, Jennifer, and I have had at Panera Bread at 7:30 in the morning to figure out what do we do next. So a lot of work is going into this. Once again, phase one was the organization and research phase, and as Jennifer said, 83% residential. So the money that's paid to run our government, 83% comes from the residents, and 17 is commercial and industrial. Next. This slide is to demonstrate that there's many sources of information to the strategic plan. So phase one, we talked to all of these people. Planometrics is the group that did the plan of conservation and development for the town of Southbury. I'm not going to go through all of this, but CCM is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. Jeff is our representative to that in Waterbury, represents 19 towns. We looked at our existing town plans. There's been a number of special studies that have been going on. We've gotten input from the Board of Selectmen, the town department heads, and the chairs of boards and commissions. And all of that information has been boiled down into our body of knowledge. That's phase one. Phase two is the phase that we're in right now, and that is with the Community Assessment Survey team, which worked to come up with what should the questions be that go on the survey. So we met with Jerry, and we gave him all the input that we got from everybody. We also have an advisory team, and then a strategic planning drafting team headed by Paul Butler and Jennifer Naylor. Phase two is the community assessment, which we're going to talk about in 1 minute. We've also gotten strategic plans and resources from other towns. We're planning on having a business summit that's going to be run by the Economic Development Commission here in Southbury and the Southbury Business Association. And that will be upcoming, we think, in May. And then any other resources that we find out about. So that's added to our body of knowledge. We see this whole thing as having 6 phases. Phase one ended on January 25th. Phase two we're into now. Phase three is the community assessment, which we'll talk about in a minute. Phase four is preparation and approval of the strategic plan. 5 is we give it to our elected officials. The key point here is the people who run our town know things that we don't know when we took the survey. So we look at the survey and we say, yes, no, we like this, we like that. But we don't know what the finances of the town are or the things that the Board of Selectmen know. So they've got to process all that information and define what is doable. And that's the job of our elected officials, led by Mr. Manville. And then finally, we're recommending that we would monitor the progress of all of this with a strategic planning commission. We don't have one right now. And what that would be is are we meeting the expectations of the community and of our elected officials? So that's it. And with that, I'm going to introduce you in a second. I got another slide. The survey was put together by Jerry, Center for Research and Public Policy. And this is a little bit about who they are. They're in all 50 states. They've been around since 1979. Europe, Mexico, Canada, South America, Puerto Rico, and Africa. So we got the top group. So people might say, well, you took the low bid, but we got the best.
We did.
Got the best. Next. Little background, and I'm not going to read this, but this is Jerry's background. If I read his full credentials, we wouldn't have time to present the results. But anyways, this is a little bit about who he is and some of the accomplishments that he's had. And with that, Jerry.
Great.
Great. Thank you all for your time tonight, and I appreciate you coming out and hearing the results. Just wanted to, before we get started, I just wanted to a word about surveys. As you can imagine, most municipalities around the nation go to task planning for their community, for their residents. Not all of them go out and get public input, residential input, before they go to that task. So to the credit of the town leaders, to the task force, to the town government. They wanted to make an exhaustive effort of collecting public opinion, and I've watched them in motion for the past few months, and they really did a great job in trying to get the word out and get people to participate. So it's not done in every community, and it should be, to collect input as you go to task planning for folks. My job tonight is to convey the results to you for the survey that was just finished. Last Friday, we closed at noon. I'll talk a little bit about that, but we did get one overnight package that came in just before the deadline. A person spent $24 to make sure it was in on time. So lots of interest, lots of participation, and it makes our job better, and we're really happy about that. The participants in the survey were all 18 years of age or older, of course, either residents or they reported to be an owner, manager of a business in town, and we'll talk more about that too. It was open for about a month. It was online for about a month, which is a good amount of time, from March 21st to the 20th. So people had a good amount of time. Surveys are built like books in a sense, because you pick an area for investigation and then you build questions underneath each of those areas. So your survey too was built like a book, and these are the chapters. So we first wanted to just get a feel of why people moved here, why people continue to live here. We wanted to measure quality of life here in town, what their own personal view of their own personal quality of life is. We also wanted to rate services offered by the town and have them actually provide a rating and how they feel about town services. Opinions about the sufficiency of town resources and services available. So this was also partly a needs assessment, if you will, to discover things that people think are needed here in town. Views on current issues in town. Willingness to pay more in taxes for several different initiatives. So we tested different things that are conceptual out there and whether or not people would be willing to pay a little bit more in taxes. Interest in concepts, ideas, programs, volunteer opportunities. Lots of folks said that they'd be willing to volunteer in different areas, and ranging from EMS through the fire department. And then just some final thoughts about issues that Southbury will face in 5 to 10 years. I think that's the way the question was worded going forward, and collected their views on that. Then we collected some demographics. This survey, of course, is very confidential. We don't have the names of the respondents. We disassociate the names from the surveys as they come in. But we did collect demographics because we wanted to be able to do some cross-tabulations of data. So on 9 different data points, we've provided Jennifer and John some cross-tabulations that show results by different demographic groups. For example, do I have a child living at home right now? Am I a renter? Am I an owner? Male, female, and on and on and on, right through the demographics by core questions. And in fact, we did one on Heritage Village, if they reported living here. So you can see the results of Heritage Village folks versus the rest of the community. Not a lot of difference in that area. You'll see if you do look through the crosstabs. A little bit about methodology. We just wanted to remind everyone that at least in our office, we make sure that the surveys are fair, they're balanced, and they can't be criticized afterwards. So we watch very carefully over the design of surveys. Oftentimes we'll tell a client, now you really can't word it that way because it tends to be a little bit leading. So we're really careful about it. And you've all seen surveys reported in the news where they have scales of excellent, very, very, very good, good, and poor. So you take the top part of that, or the top half of that, and wonderful things are happening in that community. So you've got to have a really balanced and careful scale, because we can be criticized, and then ultimately the town can be criticized. So that's our obligation to you, is to make sure everything is fair, it's balanced, it's even. And then everything that was done in-house: survey design, computer programming, a pretest, the broadcasting of the survey, getting it out there, coding, editing, data entry, verification, validation, logic checks, computer analysis, and then finally report writing, and then here we are tonight. So the task force was wonderful to work with. They provided us, as John said, a lot of input on the survey design. They did all sorts of announcements about the start of the survey. I saw the news articles about it. We posted on the town website so that people can go there and click on the link and complete it. We had, I think, maybe one or two minor IT issues that we had to try to work on, but otherwise it went very smoothly. People who wanted to participate could indeed do that. In our office, we helped design a little postcard that we mailed to 742 business owners, encouraging them to go online and complete the survey so we can get their perspective and share that with the town too. And then we provided another 1,000 postcards for distribution around the community to residents, or where residents are typically hanging out too. It's a quantitative rather than qualitative research design. We had a whopping 1,177 surveys returned by last Friday at noon. In perspective, folks, most surveys in this country range from 400 to 1,000. That's what, if a municipality goes out, that's their goal, is to get 400. Because that, on a municipal level, that's the goal, 400. And that's statistically sound, reliable data. On the state level, you're going to shoot for more like a 600 sample. On the our college and university clients, when they do a national poll, they're doing 1,000 nationwide. So your results kept coming in, and Brooke kept, they would always ask me, how many surveys today, how many surveys today? So I would email the office, and they would tell us what we're up to. And then when we passed 1,000, I was really impressed. So we've got a good representation of folks. Surveys were accessible either online, as you all know, but also a hard copy. They could call our office and receive a hard copy. Or, some folks just wanted to do it by phone. So we did it also by phone. And it's also interesting, too, of the hard copies that were mailed out, 26 hard copies mailed out. Do you know how many we received back? 26. Wow. In time. Wow. So very impressive. So 1,177 on the next slide shows you the margin for error. It's at plus or minus 2.7% at a 95% confidence level. What does that mean? That means, if you remember back to either high school or college statistics 101, that means if you don't like these results and you say, Jerry, go do it again, we're going to come back to you with the results that are within 2.7% of the results that you're about to see tonight. So please don't ask us to do this again. So everyone had an opportunity to participate. Lots of people knew about it. So we'll start going through the summary of findings. Let's start with the first question was, how closely are you following the task force and all that they're doing? We had 4.6% tell us very closely, 25% said somewhat closely, 38.1% not very closely, 31.8% not at all. But Jennifer, I think you used the 50% mark, but in reality you had 69.9% were at least aware of what was going on. And in a country where how many adults in this country cannot name who the president is? How many? What percentage? How many adults in this country cannot name who the president of the United States is? Oh, wow. 5% of the population cannot name their president. So in that kind of a world, 69.9% aware that this is going on is pretty darn good. Quality of life. When we really started getting into the meat of the survey, the section on quality of life, we're going to come to that total in a second. But we posed the question, what were the original reasons for you moving to town, or the reasons why you continue to live in town? It was a closed-ended question where we accepted multiple responses, so people could say more than one thing. But this is the declining order of the reasons why people moved here, and it's really telling. Appearance, the town character, the feeling that it's a community was at the head of the list at 52.7%, mentioned that. The school system, 52% rounded up. The neighborhoods, just the neighborhood feel, a good neighborhood feel, 48%. Location, housing, nice houses, affordable. Community reputation. amenities in town. Birthplace or my family's nearby was another reason. And then we have a list, if you do decide to read the report, the other comments are listed in the report too. There are other reasons, but with less frequency of mention too. And then a few people, 1.1, we're not sure. So we asked then where the heck they came from if they moved to town. These were the leading responses of where people came from if they did in fact move into town rather than started out here. New York, Danbury, these are in declining order. Newtown, Woodbury, Waterbury, always lived in Southbury. That was the 1, 2, 3, 6th highest response. Bethel, Naugatuck, New Jersey, Mass, Brookfield, Stratford, Ridgefield, New Milford, and Middlebury. So that's where folks have come from. So your quality of life, 99% quality of life here in town. As residents, you enjoy the town, but that's really, we don't see that a lot. And in most cities, that could range from 40 to 60% quality of life. So that's really impressive. That's very hard to beat. So very good response. Standard of living compared to 2 years ago, we asked if it had improved. Was the same pretty much, but good. The same in poor, or declined, and then they could always tell us they were unsure. But we had 86% had a relatively positive standard of living currently, which is the 16.8 plus the 69.2% combined. The reason we ask that is because in down times, economically declining times, residents tend to rate services poorly or more poorly than they normally would. They might have other issues going on. So it's important to have that as a cross tabulation so that you could sort of explain other responses in the survey by knowing what they're going through economically and financially. So on town services, didn't have them rate probably everything, but they did rate the ones that are posted here. The highest positive rating was recorded for library services. This was a scale of 1 to 10, where 7 through 10 are considered to be the positive ratings. Library, I haven't seen your library, but
You should.
I should.
It's amazing.
It's excellent.
Is it? But I haven't seen that as the top of the list before, so that's really impressive. Public safety services, services for seniors, senior transportation, historic preservation at 78.2, recreation programs, road maintenance. I know for a fact there's not one pothole in town, right?
There's 2.
Oh, there's 2, okay. Town zoning and planning practices, services for youth. So, the way you look at this is most communities will strive for about 80% or higher. So this gives town planners some guidance and town officials on areas to really focus on. But you'll see services for youth come up a lot in this survey in different ways in different areas. Town zoning and planning, they can't say yes to everyone, so they often are in a community towards the bottom of the list. And then road maintenance, every town has issues. So these might seem logical to you. But it does give you some guidance. If there's some areas to improve upon, you have to try to get at why services for youth are lower than other ratings in town too. Then we had a list of a lot of different types of resources or services. And we asked the question, are there too many, too few, or about the right amount of things like public transportation, upscale dining options? This is considered to be sort of a community needs question of what the community thinks are needed in town. So these are all the too few responses, so in declining order. So the 68.7% said there's too few public transportation, 62% upscale dining options, the waterfront access, lake recreation. So what you're beginning to see is this is some great feedback as one of the data points into the strategic planning process for them to look at this and say, we're doing well here, but there's a lot of folks that want to see more dining establishments come into town. So let's work a bit on that. Or more cultural or economic or entertainment venues. So let's work on that. Not so much need to be focused on passive open space because not that many people said it's needed. You probably have sufficient amount right now. So these types of questions give guidance to your planners in town. This, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is the detailed version of what you just saw. Upscale dining options at 62 compared to 35 that say there's enough. 2.5 said there's too many of them already. Pet walking trails, 28.5. Active open space, again, you must have some pretty decent active open space as well as passive open space because you have 3/4 saying we have enough in town. So
That's great quality of life. in our town.
that's why it's great quality of life, yeah. But they're interested in more access to the waterfront, about evenly split on having sufficient businesses in town to meet their needs. So, public transportation, 68.7% say there's too little. I know that's a real tough issue to deal with, expensive issue to deal with, but it's out there. Energy, environmental conservation programs, a lot of times those are sponsored by utilities, but communities can get involved in that too, as well. Cultural or entertainment venues, 50% say there's too few. Efforts to protect town water areas at 32.3%. And then on current Southbury issues, we had a number of statements, and what we asked for is whether they strongly agreed, somewhat disagreed, or strongly disagreed with each of the 4 statements. My perception of Southbury is very positive, 94.2%. Strongly or somewhat agreed with that. The protection of the aquifer as our drinking source should be a continuing aspiration of the town, 89.4% agreed with that. I'm in favor of and support a public Pomperaug River Greenway corridor, 68.6%. And another youth question here. Southbury is doing enough to retain our youth and attracting young people to our town at only 30.6%, either strongly or somewhat agreeing with that. So you're beginning to see some of the youth issues come out. Conceptually, we just threw in here whether they strongly supported, somewhat opposed, or strongly opposed the idea of hiring a town manager. We had 47.4% either strongly or somewhat support that, as opposed to 28.6% who were either somewhat or strongly opposed to hiring of a town manager. So not quite 2 to 1, but in the ballpark. But people have to realize what that means before they fully commit. And the next idea thrown out there was the support or opposition to an independent police department. We had about 44.5% either strongly supported it or somewhat supported it. 29.3% either somewhat opposed or strongly opposed. So it gives you just a flavor of what residents are interested in related to an independent police department. On tax proposals, interesting for us because a lot of communities just don't want any discussion about tax increases whatsoever. So we named 5 different areas and asked them if they'd be willing to pay somewhat more in taxes in order to secure more recreational programs. You had 56% in favor of more paying taxes, additional taxes to support more recreational programming. Additional senior transportation. They said they want it, and here they're saying they're willing to pay for it. Larger municipal community center, 52.1%. A larger senior center designed to help seniors age in place, 45%. An economic resource position, 33.6%, strongly are willing to pay additional taxes to secure that position. So again, it gives you some guidance. If any of one of these went out for referendum, this is an early gauge of how it might do. This probably would not do so well if I don't think you'd ever have to go out for referendum on that, but just gives you a larger community center you might have to. That might squeak by in a referendum based on these results, depending on cost, and, what that extra, is it a lot of extra taxes? Is it a little extra taxes? So, on interest and opportunities. So we tested various concepts, ideas, programs, and we wanted to know how interested they were in each of them. So the left-hand column is the percentage that said they're very or somewhat interested. The right-hand column are the remainder without the unsurers, but the percent somewhat uninterested or not at all interested. So utilization of historic buildings for productive public-private business use to offset maintenance costs. Lots of support for that, lots of interest at 80%. Lakefront recreational development for residential use by residents, provided the utility owners grant permissions. 2/3, just over 2/3. Increase education for residents regarding energy efficiency program. So here's the second time you see where the residents in town want to see the town involved in efficiency programming. Town sponsorship of more education and engagement on public issues such as drug and alcohol addiction. Not something that, unless you have a well-funded health department, that you're usually involved in, but you've got 2/3 interested in seeing that happen. Extending the current enterprise zone near Waterbury Oxford Airport, 63% interested in seeing that happen. Town sponsorship of more events designed to draw regional residents to town. Is that right? Mm-hmm. That's right. Okay. And then we get closer to the 50%. Town assistance to improve coordination of for-profit and nonprofit cultural organizations. 54.9 would like to see more of that. And then finally, some workshops, which I thought was a great idea of how to use the town website, how to find things, learn a little bit about water sources, water conservation policies, and probably an ongoing educational program. But, you can't think of this as under 50% because 49% extrapolated on the total population here. That's still a huge number that have an interest in seeing that. So on consolidation, everyone likes efficiencies. Here we tested that up for the Zoning and Planning Commission, and we've had 70.1% strongly agreed or somewhat agreed that the Planning and Zoning Commission should be merged into one to streamline the application and approval process. If that happened, that might go a long way to improve those initial ratings that you saw. So now we're talking about tax incentives to attract businesses and the willingness to see town officials write policies or whatever they need to do in order to have that happen. 66.3% very interested or somewhat interested in seeing some business tax incentives here. And the question also noted that in surrounding towns there are tax incentives too. So not much more, folks, just some final open-ended questions. We wanted to know what residents thought over the next 5 to 10 years the town of Southbury would be facing as far as issues go. And these were more or less in declining order, the things. And remember, 1,177 different opinions were offered. So if you want to, you can eventually see the rest of them. But these were the top mentions by frequency of mention. So need for viable business development, become business friendly, retaining, attracting youth and young families. I won't read the whole list, but budget, tax stability, quality of education, enough youth activities and opportunities, road maintenance, some of the things you've already heard from the other parts of the survey, care for aging population, the school budget, public safety, school budget concerns, maintaining property values, affordable housing, overpopulation, overdevelopment, and so on and so forth, all the way down to limited job opportunities, lack of senior entertainment. So if you were really to focus on the 1,177, that's really where your focus is on those issues. And then a final wrap-up question in the survey was, can you give us any final thoughts that you'd like to convey to town leaders, town planners that have not been covered in the survey? Sometimes they repeated some things that were in the survey, like road maintenance anyways, but that's okay. But these are the things that they named in the final wrap-up open-ended question, that these weren't part of the survey, they were typed in, just like the last slide. But they wanted to convey business development concerns, the need for viable businesses in towns, also in declining order, tax concerns, road maintenance and traffic concerns, need for indoor and outdoor community spaces, housing development concerns, use of the Southbury Training School, finding a balance, a bridge gap between senior and youth support, continued communication, input from residents. Residents like to offer their views and their opinions. Maintaining safe and welcoming town, sponsorship of community events, address waterway, beach access, attention to sidewalk, care for Main Street, improve public safety services, improved use of transportation, environmental utility concerns. And then, just before or after the demographics, we just named a number of things that residents can volunteer in. And I was actually very surprised at these numbers, and was wondering if the town started getting any calls. But 25% said that they would be interested in volunteering or donating to help make a new community center a reality, volunteering or donating with EMS, volunteering or donating to the Southbury and Middlebury Acting Responsibly Together SMART. 21.8% said yes, they'd be willing to either volunteer or donate. 18.3% time to help increase community health programs. Volunteering time by participating in local government. Volunteering time or donating to the Southbury Volunteer Fire Department. And like I said before about these numbers, even if you took the 16.5% and multiplied that by the town population, it's a huge number of folks that are willing to do some volunteer work. So as part of your outreach, and as part of as the media and newspapers can help you get the word out on just how to do that, who to get in touch with in order to do this. I mean, I lived in Easton for many years, and I was an EMT in Monroe. But we were always looking for volunteers. I'm just not so sure people knew how to get in touch with people to do that. So that's really good to know that there's a large population here that are willing to help town leaders. So folks, thanks very much for the opportunity to convey this information. We have some time if there are any questions of me or of Jennifer and John. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you were going to give some of the demographics, like the age.
Sure. Good question, actually. The average length of time living in Southbury, you can imagine the range, but was 18.25 years. 94% said that they own their own house. 3.7% said that they are renting. 2% were 0.2% unsure, and some preferred not to answer. Ages, for example, less than 35 was about 5.4%, 35 to 44 was 18%, 45 to 54, 24%, 55 to 64, 20%, 65 to 74, 19%, and 75 and older was at 9.7%. So a good distribution, but it's important then you look at these different age groups separately and see what their different needs are based on the survey too. That's what the cross tabulations are for. Income, we tested for anywhere from, of course, 0 all the way up to over 300,000. We have 5.9% say they make more than $300,000. So they're the ones that are going to buy the new center for you. So 42% said that they do indeed have children living at home under 18 years of age. Are you a business owner? We had 139 out of the 1,177 respondents were business owners. So again, the major reason for asking that question is so we could look at their results separate from the rest of everyone else. Are you a business manager? That could have been a resident answering the survey, but happens to be a manager at a local shop. And do you live in Heritage Village? Was 18.2%. And I think John told me it's really about 17%. So pretty darn close to reality. So, yes, ma'am.
Did you have any, did you look at any correlation between economic development and, say, the restaurant? Because one of my personal issues is the sewer avoidance policy that we appear to have. Was there any, influence between those two?
I don't, yeah,
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier when we were talking.
Yeah, when we were
So we did have that initially in the survey to ask this pointed question, but the task force felt on evaluating the questions that would be presented to the public, that question warranted a bit of information, a bit of education. And since we were told that the survey process is not to necessarily educate people, we extracted it from the survey. It is still something that we are considering for the strategic plan. So it's not off the table, it just wasn't asked because we weren't trying to educate people in the process.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
yes, ma'am.
There seemed to be a little bit of a dichotomy between the desire or the need for an economic development person
Yeah.
and the lack of business in town, which is what,
Yeah.
the tax is 13%, did I hear
17.
correctly? 17?
Yeah.
So something's not working together here, it would seem.
That's a really good observation, actually. You're right, there's a big difference. I think that could come in time, as John said, sometimes you have to educate people about what this means. Maybe they don't know what that position does, but that was in the tax question, remember?
Right.
So are you willing to pay more taxes for that position? But if you, can't you do that through grants too, or?
If I may,
Oh, sure.
Jeff, do you want to touch?
No, go ahead.
So we, as you all have seen publicized lately, we just put the budget in the paper, and it's going out for vote May
Second.
next week. As part of our budgeting process, we did budget for a half position for an economic resource person. And I think the Board of Finance might have tweaked that down a little bit more, but we're putting the feelers out. So although it's come back as maybe a negative in the survey, it's something those that are involved in the government and who understand economic development understand that it is something that needs to happen. So that's I was looking at Lorraine, but I know you want to ask questions, sorry.
That's okay, sorry.
And of course, in the survey results, you're getting some conflicting signals here. One in there says, would you be willing to pay for it? And the percentage says no. So it's.
When was the last time someone wanted to pay for something?
I agree.
Long time ago.
Last night when I took my wife to dinner, I was glad to pay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. For those of you who have not had enough of this, we have a repeat performance at Town Hall at 7 o'clock. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And happy birthday.